Hey there, my little bubbles. Skydoge here, just with a couple housekeeping notes up at the top. First, you may notice that my audio quality as I speak to you now is superior to my audio quality in the episode which you are about to listen to. Lady Gleep and I are aware that the audio is subpar, to say the least, and we're experimenting with different methods and equipment to find the best way to get the crispest audio for the best possible podcast. So thank you for bearing with us as we do that. Additionally, I wanted to begin this episode with a new and more than likely recurring segment that I would like to call Shit I Got Wrong. And I don't know, maybe we can get like a Wheel of Fortune type audience echo on that in future episodes. But for now, I'm just going to tell you about the shit I got wrong, because a big part of the goals of this podcast are to demonstrate the process of talking about politics with full recognition that I don't have access to all the information and I don't always say the right things. And while that is not ideal, I'd like to be correct, it doesn't and shouldn't discourage me or you from participating in discourse. So, I think it's important to start each episode with a recognition of whatever I got wrong in the previous episode, because my intention is to provide quality information, not perpetuate disinformation. On today's installment of Shit I Got Wrong, in the last episode, Lady Gleep asked me if the Keystone XL pipeline was the same thing as the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I responded yes. The answer is, in fact, no. The Keystone XL pipeline is a pipeline that begins in Canada and runs all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, where there are oil refineries. The Dakota Access Pipeline begins in North Dakota, runs through South Dakota and Iowa, and ends at a refinery in Illinois. Both have faced protests from environmentalist groups and indigenous groups affected by the pipeline running through their land, but they are not the same thing. In the episode you're about to hear, I regard Biden's stimulus plan as a $1.8 trillion plan. It is, in fact, $1.9 trillion. So every time I say $1.8 trillion, add an extra $100 billion to that, because I did get that wrong. Apologies for that. The cost of the Biden America Rescue Plan is $1.9 trillion. Finally, there have been some developments since we recorded this episode a week or two ago about the bill itself. It has passed the House and the Senate through the reconciliation process. And there was a bit of drama when the bill went to the Senate, and it ran into the Senate Parliamentarian, who we will discuss on this episode. So stay tuned after the episode for a little quick update / editorializing from Skydoge. And with that said, let's start the show.
Yeah, that simply just won't do. I'm going to need you to move on that.
Move where?
Up. I need you to go up on that number, okay? Like, I have constituents that are counting on me to fund certain programs, and you're making it really hard.
You're hard? I thought we were just friends. It's kind of weird.
What are you talking about?
We're in a bath together. I
thought we were in a negotiation about the federal budget. Excuse me.
Well, excuse you.
This is a bit awkward, is it not?
It depends.
Honestly, I have had more awkward experiences in bathrooms.
I have too.
At least we can bond over that, if nothing else.
If nothing else, I guess we could say that we have had this moment shared together here just now.
A very, very long moment. York, everybody. Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of The Liberal Bubble. I am the one and only Skydoge, and I am joined, as always, by the incomparable, stunning Lady Gleep.
you were gonna say incompetent.
I was not going to say that, but
I know, it's just my own insecurity. I was like, thank
jumped
you.
right out.
Yeah, you said the kind words. Thank you so much.
I did. You're most welcome.
It is me, Lady Glee.
every one of them.
Howdy ho. Your favorite Glow.
How's it going, Glow? What's new with you?
It's a good day. It's new and it's fun, and I took a bath last night, a real one. Not that ours aren't real, but a real one.
Ours are real.
Yeah, ours are real, but like one where I wash my body, because ours are for fun.
Yeah, ours are dirty. And what's going? What have you been following this week in the news? Anything caught your eye?
I saw some stuff about the impeachment. I saw that the government, or they voted that it was impeachable, but not that they did it, question mark.
Okay, so I can untangle that a bit. I will say I'm an episode behind on impeachment, or as I like to call
The
it,
Nickelodeon version.
I love the Nickelodeon version, but I'm calling this one Impeaches and Cream 2 Electric Boogaloo. And I'm a bit behind, so no spoilies. I did see on Reddit that he will be acquitted, but we don't know until the finale.
I don't know what acquitted means. I just know when
it means not guilty.
Oh, because I know if the gloves don't fit, you must acquit.
Right. So if the glove doesn't fit O.J. Simpson's hand, you have to find him not guilty.
Yeah.
Was the essence of the argument. It just rhymes.
He will not be acquitted?
No. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit.
No, but Donald Trump. So he will be guilty.
No.
Oh.
He will likely be found not guilty despite overwhelming evidence. We're going to do a separate episode on that probably when the impeachment itself wraps up so that we can reflect on how things worked. I would refer people to like hard news sources in the meantime, because I'm certainly not an expert on things as they unfold. But I can say, having watched the entirety of the first day's proceedings, all 7 hours, the first day was just a discussion about whether or not the impeachment itself was constitutional. The Democratic impeachment House managers made the argument that there is historical precedent for impeaching former officials. It's happened before in history. In addition to that, Donald Trump is being impeached for an offense he committed while in office. The impeachment was voted on and passed while he was in office. The Senate refused to re-adjourn for a trial while he was in office. And so we are doing it now. And they are doing it not with the intention of removing him from office, because obviously he's gone, but with the intention of barring him from ever running again.
Mm-hmm. For president specifically, or just in general for any type of seat?
Any public office. And the position of the former president's lawyers is, how can you impeach a former president? Because he is now a private citizen. And you can't remove a private citizen from office. And therefore, you cannot impeach him. Interestingly, they kept saying these proceedings belong in a court of law, which I'm like, president's lawyers know their argument is charge him with a crime. I get the argument. Their point is that the legal system, the judicial branch, is created to adjudicate these issues and provide due process to individuals to determine innocence or guilt.
Yeah.
The problem is that impeachment proceedings and criminal proceedings are not the same. They don't function similarly. Impeachment is a political process that is created to remove people who are a danger from office and prevent them from re-entering office. It's incredibly mundane, but it goes like past mundane back into being entertaining, because you've got like both sides citing the same clause of the Constitution, but the president's lawyers note the presence of a comma and the conjunction and as opposed to or in regards to the consequences. I don't have the exact language in front of me, and that is incredibly important in the Constitution because we're dickering over conjunctions and commas, but really strange. I mean, the case itself, like the former president's argument was a bit like overlapping. and it would contradict itself at times. Like, Americans know how to change administrations. They just did it. But how dare you seek to disenfranchise 74 Americans who voted for Donald Trump? And I'm like, those two things seem like they're kind of in opposition to each other, especially when they're argued side by side. But, okay.
All right.
Ultimately, it was just like, we've gathered here today to decide whether or not we have any right to be here. And it turns out they did on a vote of 54 in favor. And so the trial proceeded into its second day. And I am in the middle of that day's worth of proceedings, and that is composed of the Democratic impeachment House managers presenting their case. And it is hard to watch.
Yeah.
But
what are you watching it on?
I'm watching the PBS NewsHour recorded live stream. It's available on YouTube for anyone interested.
Are there places where they do highlights, or would?
I believe the PBS NewsHour YouTube channel had highlights as well of certain speakers. Listen, if you've got 7 hours, I like watching the whole video, and I recommend others do too, because these things out of context, like the clips that news shows take, they just simply can't illustrate the nuance of the incredibly mundane legalese arguments that were happening. I'll be honest, I kept finding myself distracted. One of the president's lawyers, every time he takes a sip of water, he holds the top of his head as he tips his head back, and I simply don't know why. And another time, one of the president's lawyers, he's expressing the sentiment that the United States Senate is filled with patriots. And this is very nitpicky. I admit it. This is not a matter of substance, but it did make me chuckle.
Yeah.
He goes, there are two things I know. A, every senator in this room considers themselves a patriot. And two, every senator considers every other senator, every other 99 senators a patriot as well. And I'm like, A and two, huh? Okay.
And two.
It is the most stupid objection on my part, but it did make me chuckle.
It's so funny, the things that we pick up. Do you remember? I forget what it was for, but that guy who showed up with a Stop and Shop bag instead of a briefcase, on Trump's legal team a few years ago.
Oh, I don't recall. There's so many legal teams.
How have you liked being back on Twitter? Are you?
I hate it.
Oh, you hate it?
I do. Or I suppose I don't know where it fits in my life anymore.
Because I saw you tweeted about the impeachment, and I was like, oh,
I did.
Tweeting.
I'm trying to produce fresh, tasty content for all of the rabid fans out there.
Hit them with an @ on Twitter in case you want to follow Skydoge.
Yeah, at Skydoge Bubble, SKYDOGE Bubble. Hit me up for me screaming my opinions into the void of Twitter.
That's what Twitter's made for.
Yep, just yelling into a void. The fact is, it's equal part really useful information, in the moment, and the other half is really dumb tweets from Senate staffers that I nitpick like I do the president's lawyers saying A and two.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to use Twitter anymore. I definitely don't have any fucking idea how to use Facebook. That website is a nightmare, okay?
The only time I'm ever on Facebook is to be on Marketplace, and once I get a good buy on Marketplace, it's over.
I don't even know what Marketplace is. I can assume, but I'm just I don't know how it works. I don't know what a news feed is anymore.
Yeah, I don't
Zuck
know
has
how
lost
to use
me.
Facebook. Except for Marketplace.
But that's not what we're here to discuss today.
Yeah.
Today, I want to talk about a very, very special thing. A legislative tool called budget reconciliation. Ooh. We're gonna take budget reconciliation, a procedural tool which allows you to pass legislation with a simple majority, and make it sexy. Oh, yeah.
I'm so interested.
I'm going to tell you, this shit's dry as fuck. So we're going to try to
I don't
spice
think
it up.
I have a single idea on what budget reconciliation is. Do I? You think I know? I feel like you've definitely described it to me a little before, but it's
I might have, but I will be honest, prior to my research, I'm not sure I had a firm grasp on what it is.
All right, so we're here to learn. How is it like what part is it taking place in like current political jargon right now?
Okay, so in the current political landscape, Joe Biden has proposed a $1.8 trillion spending package called the American Rescue Act, I believe.
Yes.
And he gives the speech about unity on Inauguration Day. Unity is the theme. But budget reconciliation is a tool in Congress that allows legislation to pass with a simple majority, just 51 votes. It means that this particular budget bill cannot be filibustered in the Senate. The filibuster is a rule which allows a minority of senators to object and requires 60 senators to advance a piece of legislation. When budget reconciliation is invoked, you cannot do that. In addition, debate on the proposal is limited to 20 hours, period.
Quick question.
Ask away.
No. Oh, say okay. So budget reconciliation is so you're invoking it so they can't filibuster. Is that because there's a filibuster problem?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And boy, will we be talking about that.
Like people are overusing it or something where it's just like nothing is happening.
That's exactly right. It has brought the upper chamber of our Congress, the Senate, to a screeching halt. Nothing is happening. And we will do an episode on the filibuster forthcoming.
Okay.
It is a thing of great interest within the liberal bubble.
Anytime I think of filibustering, I just think of Leslie Knope and her roller skates.
Parks and Rec is truly a wonderful show. In addition, the budget reconciliation process bans what they call non-germane amendments during the debate process and amendment process. And what that means, non-germane just means not relevant to the topic at hand. So, for example, like I can't propose an amendment to a budget reconciliation bill which institutes federal background checks for all gun sales.
Because it has nothing to do with it.
Nothing to do with the federal budget. And budget reconciliation is a tool for the federal budget issues of revenue, debt, and expenditures.
But what are the little attachy thingies that people try to stick into the...
Those are the things that are expressly forbidden. They are called riders.
Riders, yeah.
Yes.
So
little
no
amendments,
riders.
No riders. And we'll talk a bit about how those things are removed from the legislation. But first, I think it's helpful to talk about the history of how it came to be, because I learned all about it, and I'm not putting that to waste. So you're going to all learn about it. Welcome. Enjoy.
Woo!
So budget reconciliation is the result of a post-Watergate reform. They passed a law called the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 out of concern about the growing federal deficit and about transparency in government funding. Quick note about debt versus deficit. They are used sometimes interchangeably. They are not the same thing. A deficit is the amount of money that the government is short of within a given year. So
like when the register is short at work versus like you owe me
it's
this
one
amount
day.
Of money.
So if you want to use the example of like a register at work, the United States has bought things, but their register is short one day or 1 year. That's the deficit. The debt is the sum of all of the year's deficits. Okay. It totals over, I believe, $17 trillion.
Yeah, there's like a account that moves so fast in New York. I remember when I saw it when I was young walking down the street. I was like, that's a number I can't read.
You can Google United States debt calculator or debt clock, and it's an upsetting thing to look at. But it's important to keep those two things separate as we proceed. A deficit is a annual, yearly lack of money, and the debt is the summation of
overall
compounding years of overspending. So this post-Watergate reform, the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, created in both the House and the Senate budget committees. So prior to this bill, there were appropriation committees in both houses, and they would appropriate money without any clear oversight. And that's how it was for like the first 200 years of our country. So the Congressional Budget Committees provide a more robust planning and assessment and outline of the money that we intend to spend as a government within a given fiscal year.
Yeah,
it's saying
usually a president will be like, we're spending X amount on military, X amount on education, X amount on whatever.
Yes, but it isn't the president.
Oh.
It isn't the president that decides. It's the budget committees. They create a budget resolution which states how much a given program or expenditure will increase the federal deficit.
Where's this committee? Are they hired by, like, every 4 years? Do they get a new?
No. So the way committees work in Congress is their appointments. They're representatives assigned by leadership to positions. So you may be assigned to the House Ways and Means Committee, which is in charge of overseeing tax legislation. You may be assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee or the House Intelligence Committee. They're just like small groups of Congress people that have a specific focus to their work.
Yeah.
So that they are Congress people. And the assignments can change with each incoming Congress. We get a Congress every 2 years. And they also are tied to the amount of fundraising that a congressperson does for the party, which is a bit messed up, but that is a topic for another day.
They have to go Girl Scout style, like selling cookies to make money for the government. Is that what you're telling me?
No. They have to lobby to special interests.
Same thing.
To make money. Yeah. No. Well, I mean, I suppose, but if
they have to go out seeking money.
Yes, but there's less corruption involved with the sale of cookies than it is with the solicitation of big dollar donations.
But you would never assume that in the government, like your congressman or woman has to lobby. I don't know. I never thought about it like that. I thought people lobby when they need money to run for their seat.
They do. There's a documentary on HBO called The Swamp, which goes into this in more detail. I believe it's traced back to Newt Gingrich, who he changed Congress when he retook the House for Republicans in 1994 for the first time in like 40 years. I would probably opt for the word broke Congress, but that's a personal opinion. I'd also recommend on the topic of Newt Gingrich and the changes that Congress underwent during the mid-90s, the book The Red and the Blue by Steve Kornacki, who is the guy on MSNBC that does all the data calculations on election nights.
I love him.
Yeah, they like chain him to a desk and make him like frantically calculate things with a camera pointed right in his face. No, that's John King on CNN, who just plays with a giant iPad, and he's like, I'm looking for this county. Oh, that's not the right county. Where's the county I was
Steve
looking at a minute
doesn't do that
ago?
either? I thought they both did it.
They do on separate networks. Just Steve Kornacki, I think, is better at it. That's an opinion.
Yeah. I mean, an opinion I think I also have.
But
anyways,
setting that aside, the budget committees create a budget resolution which states how much a given program will increase the federal deficit. And committees, these budgetary committees, are also given jurisdiction over things that they otherwise would not have jurisdiction over. So appropriation committees are in charge of what they call discretionary spending, things like the military, for example. And then there are other things like, for example, tax code, which is subject to the Ways and Means Committee in the House. And the reconciliation process allows the budget committees to reconcile all of these disparate committees and get everyone on the same page in terms of funding. So each chamber, both budget committees in each chamber, passes its version of a budget. The two are then synthesized, and both houses vote on the same version of the bill. So they're sent to a conference committee of sorts to iron out any differences between the two versions, and then one is presented to Congress for passage. Once it is adopted, the appropriations committees are then tasked with assigning the 12 subcommittees in Congress the job of drafting the legislation to meet the goals of the budget.
Mm-hmm.
And these programs which they create have to remain within the budgetary constraints outlined in the...
Depending on who's on this budget committee, is it like political in any sense where, I mean, I assume it's political, but like, can they say budgets for specific things are higher or lower, which could lean more left or right?
Absolutely. Like, the budget negotiations require both parties in many cases, and the legislative priorities shift based on the administration. So like the Trump administration was very concerned with border security. And as we'll discuss later, his border wall, he asked for $5.7 billion.
The committee was like, no.
Right. And then he shut down the government for 35 days.
Awful. But if the people in the committee lobby for the money, can people who give the money be like, it has to go to this or I'm not giving it to you?
So the people giving the money are the taxpayers.
Oh, okay. I thought they lobbied for the money. I was confused.
No, this is the government's money. With the revenue it's taken in, it's primarily taxes.
Okay, cool. On the page.
And wonderful. So an example of when you would have to readjust legislation because it exceeds the budget constraints is like if you pass a budget resolution which says we will not increase the federal debt by $1 trillion over the next 10 years. The period of 10 years is important in this process, and we'll get to that. And then you submit a bill which says, which is a tax proposal, and then it's evaluated, and it turns out it's going to cost $1.5 trillion. You then have to redraft that legislation to reduce the cost. Otherwise, it cannot pass through the process.
Wow. I couldn't imagine working in the government. It just seems like there's so much stuff going on at all times. I feel like
Absolutely.
It's being a first grade teacher when you have to teach one group of kids 9 subjects. You're like,
There's a lot of moving parts, and one of the goals of reconciliation was making sure the left hand is talking to the right hand in terms of governing, because like a lot of people will say that the federal government is like a big ship and it takes a lot of time to steer it in a different direction. It does not turn on a dime because it is a behemoth of bureaucracy and subcommittees.
And it also has to take care of so many people, and some of those people don't want it taking care of them, and some of those people really need it to take care of them. And there's just there's so many things for like the amount of people that are in the government versus how many people they're like representing is just crazy.
Yeah, if you wanted to do like a student teacher ratio, but for like congressional representatives, I would not attend that college perhaps.
Yeah, I don't think I would either. I would be very scared. I'd probably get on Education Connection for free.
Oh goodness, that's a throwback. So what is so essential to understand is that any legislation that is passed via the budget reconciliation process must center on federal spending, or federal revenue, or federal debt. So that might include money for infrastructure, or a change to the tax code, or expanding healthcare subsidies for low-income individuals. It cannot include non-germane things, nor can it have an impact on federal spending, which is, quote, incidental. And the definition of incidental spending comes about as part of something called the Byrd Rule, which we will discuss later in the episode. I also want to talk about the establishment of the Congressional Budget Office, otherwise known as the CBO, an impartial and nonpartisan group tasked with assessing budgetary legislation.
Tell it to us, baby.
Oh, believe me, I will. It will assess the veracity and accuracy of the legislation in regard and in relation to.
That's what's up.
The budget resolution. I don't know about you, but things are getting a little hot and heavy talking about the CBO.
I could see the snow melting on my window.
Honestly, it's got me sweating. The CBO's got me emitting some BO, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
So the CBO is extremely valuable. It provides impartial analysis of a bill. It will say it is the group which decides, okay, you said you weren't going to expand or you weren't going to raise the federal debt by $1 trillion over the course of 10 years, but this piece of legislation actually does raise it by $1.5 trillion. Try again. The CBO is the group that would instruct legislatures to do that. Do you have any questions about that?
I feel like I asked a lot of questions before, so I kind of get it now. That part.
Excellent. Now, the Congressional Budget Office is extremely useful, but it's important to note that it can be circumvented by crafty legislators. And we'll talk about that as well in a little bit. But what is also essential to know about budget reconciliation is that its usage is limited pretty severely. Otherwise, you would see everything trying to go through this system. But such is not the case.
What's allowed to go through the system versus what's not?
I mentioned broadly up at the top that it has to be related to federal revenue, expenditures, or debt.
So is Joe Biden using budget reconciliation to just try and get something done as fast as possible, or does it have to, or is there any other reason he wants to go this route for this bill or policy? What was it again? It's an act.
It's a bill.
Yeah.
No, the only reason he would do it is for expedience. And we'll talk about that particular bill at the end.
Okay.
But I'm glad that you have such questions. You're thinking ahead. You're preempting my episode outline because you see where I'm going.
I'm happy that I have some type of idea.
Heck yeah. You're on the ball. So, budget reconciliation legislation must include reconciliation instructions, and that's in quotes. And those instructions have to direct relevant committees to draft legislation on the topic at hand and within the budgetary constraints outlined. It has a limited invocation in that it can really be used only once a year. Congress will typically pass a spending bill once every fiscal year. If it doesn't do that, there are problems, which brings us to the shutdown business. So if Congress fails to reach a conclusion, if they cannot negotiate a budget package that will pass, they have to either pass what is called a continuing resolution, which says we're going to keep the government funded for X amount of days while we continue to dicker up on Capitol Hill. Mm-hmm. Or if they cannot do that, the government enters full-on shutdown mode. Non-essential workers are furloughed.
And that's what happened for that 35 days.
Yes.
That time with
right.
Trump.
So, yeah, in that instance, the Senate passed a budget. The Senate was controlled by Republicans, and it did not include in it the $5.7 billion for the border wall. And so Trump vetoed it and triggered the longest shutdown in United States history. Congratulations to former President Trump. Longest shutdown, most impeachments, breaking records, breaking democracies. It's truly something to behold.
I wish there was more people in my house to clap with me.
I'm not going to clap.
Mine was a sarcastic clap.
It's a Jeb Bush moment, you know. Please clap.
please clap.
That is oh God. If you haven't seen the video of Jeb Bush running in 2016 asking an audience to please clap, pause this, do yourself a favor, look at it, have a good laugh at Jeb, ! And then definitely come back, because we're about to talk about something super sexy, and that is the bird rule. Oh yeah.
Tweedle deedle do me.
So, the year 1985. The man, Robert Byrd. Who's Robert Byrd? The Senate Minority Leader.
In 1985? Or just born?
Yes.
Okay. Hot.
Born in 1985. He'd be a mighty young man. No, he was quite old in 1985.
Okay.
And
Bowling for Soup wrote a song about that year.
they did. I have no response. So, Robert Byrd was a Senate institutionalist, and since its first use in 1980, he had begun to see the process be abused and be used to pass things that were not specifically related to.
Are you talking about
concerns.
budget reconciliation was being overused?
Correct. Yes.
And that's why there's limitations on it now.
That is why he created something called the Byrd Rule.
Wait, sorry. Let me backtrack for a second.
Back it on up.
How did
Drop
things
it down,
like
flip it in, reverse
budget reconciliation get like started? How are they like, all right, we're gonna do this thing because it was new?
It's not a new process. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it wasn't new.
No,
It's
no.
old?
I mean, its first use was 1980 was when it was first used.
Yeah, so that's pretty new. Like in the 80s.
Oh yeah, relatively new, related to the founding of our country. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how did that even? How were they like? All right, this is the new way. We're gonna do it now. That must be hard to get through, because if making bills and laws and amendments and stuff like that is complicated, I couldn't imagine setting a new like way of doing, like a new process must be so complicated to get through.
It sure is. But in the post-Watergate era, they passed the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, which, I mean, that's how this process was created.
Okay.
That created the budget committees, which paved the way for budget reconciliation to be a thing.
So 5 years later, Byrd's all like, you guys got to stop doing the thing.
He's concerned. He's very concerned.
He's a Republican?
No, he's a Democrat.
Oh, okay.
And his rule offers a chance for people to object to, quote, extraneous provisions. And you asked me earlier, who decides what's included in budget reconciliation?
Mm-hmm.
The Byrd Rule tells you what cannot be included.
Okay.
And here's what cannot be included. Changes to Social Security. So you cannot use budget reconciliation to gut Social Security. A provision is extraneous if it doesn't change the government spending, or if the provision's impact is incidental on the government spending. And we're going to talk a little bit about what incidental means in this context. Incidental in a broad context means like barely noticeable, of minor import and impact. An example of an incidental thing ripped out of a budget reconciliation bill is the Obamacare pre-existing condition protections. Mm-hmm. So Obamacare had a provision which said if you have a pre-existing condition, you cannot be discriminated against by insurance companies. You cannot be charged exorbitant rates just because you have poor health. You cannot be denied insurance on the basis of your health. And you cannot be kicked off your insurance because you've used too much money getting health care, all of which was allowed prior to the passage of Obamacare. So that policy is a good one, right? You know, we don't want discrimination in the healthcare marketplace, but could not be included in budget reconciliation. It would have had an impact on government spending in some way, but the goal of that policy is not centered on revenue. It's centered on discrimination in the insurance marketplace. And so it needs to be a separate thing.
Okay.
And it's removed from the bill by the Senate Parliamentarian. We'll get to that in a moment.
If it's removed by the bill and it can't go through budget reconciliation, is it passed through other ways but can still be attached to the like was that still after that bill was passed separately, was it then reattached to Obamacare?
So budget reconciliation moves through a budget resolution, which says this is how much money we're going to spend. The provision which says that healthcare cannot discriminate against you on the basis of pre-existing conditions needs to be passed as a separate law, and that'll be subject to the filibuster in the Senate. So it can be part of the Obamacare policy, but it cannot go all together.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
That's basically what I was looking to hear.
Yes, like the legislative agenda of Obamacare had been split into multiple bills that were voted on. Another thing the Byrd rule forbids is increasing the federal deficit beyond a predetermined 10-year limit. But this is where the CBO comes in and where it can be circumvented through some shenanigans. So an example of this would be the Bush 43 administration tax cuts. George Bush administration passes tax cuts, but they sunset before the 10-year period is over. They expire, in other words. But everyone knows that they're probably going to be renewed. Raising taxes isn't a particularly popular thing to do. And when they expired, it was during the early years of the Obama administration. We were in a recovery from a recession, and there was worry that raising tax rates would further stifle that recovery. And so they were extended, and the CBO got played. It happens.
Yeah.
It's an imperfection in the system. The final thing which the Byrd rule forbids is any provision proposed by a committee that simply has no jurisdiction over the matter. So, you know, if the Ways and Means Committee comes up and says, I don't know why I keep choosing gun control, that they want to pass gun control, it's like, that has nothing to do with what you guys are assigned to do. And also, a gun control amendment, as we discussed earlier, would probably not make it through a reconciliation package.
There's a ton of loopholes within government, and they're trying their best to shut loopholes.
Say more.
There was more, and then it left the brain.
Just left the building.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess from this conversation, I'm kind of figuring out this was budget reconciliation was introduced in the 80s, so that money was getting distributed for the things that it needed to, and so people couldn't take advantage of different spendings. It
was for greater transparency.
Yeah. To make things less suspicious. And so people couldn't do things with money that they didn't have budgeted to them.
Well, yes, like corruption and appropriation of money kind of willy-nilly was an issue, but it also was an attempt to streamline the funding of the government.
Okay.
So it wants to promote stability in the way that the government drafts its budget and transparency. It isn't all. This is where I think your education of Washington from House of Cards comes starts to work against you, there's no lack of corruption in DC, but not everyone is Frank Underwood.
Yeah. But I feel like there are loopholes. Like by adding riders to bill, that's kind of a loophole.
I suppose. I mean, it's an amendment.
But you're trying to pass something that's like hidden within.
Yeah. I mean, it's a legislative practice that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't regard it as corrupt necessarily. I mean, it depends.
No, I don't think it's corrupt,
provision.
But they're just trying to make things pass just for for the main reason, not for all these smaller things on the side.
I think people in Congress, by and large, want to pass policy. They want to pass laws.
Yeah.
And our government's not doing very much of that. It's not functioning well, particularly the Senate. And so budget reconciliation can bypass that graveyard of democracy, as Mitch McConnell so proudly proclaimed it, and kind of facilitate the continued funding of the government. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
I forget.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So you asked me earlier, who ultimately decides what can and cannot be in the budget reconciliation rule? It's not Robert Byrd himself.
Mm-hmm.
He just wrote the rule. So the answer is the CBO and the Senate Parliamentarian. We already talked about it, but if the CBO says that your legislation is not in alignment with the budget resolution, you got a problem. Additionally, there's another person, a very important person.
How important?
So important. They're called the Senate Parliamentarian.
Ooh. When I think of Parliament, I think of the guys in the UK who wear the wigs and yell at each other.
Parliament is their form of Congress, so that's a very astute comparison. We love Senate parliamentarians. Big books, big rules,
big hair,
big decisions, big hair.
Big decisions too.
Big hair as well, yeah, sure.
I mean, they're probably bald under their wigs, but the wigs are hot.
Wait, what?
In Parliament.
Oh, they don't wear wigs anymore.
I swore you showed me a clip a few years ago, and they were all wearing wigs.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Tangent. You must be referring to the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, who I love very much. The former. He's since stepped down. None of them were wearing wigs, I regret to inform you. But he has a wonderful ability. I love it because his job is to facilitate debate. Say that 5 times fast. Within Parliament. And when Parliament gets rowdy, which is what Parliament does, he yells at people and he'll shout order, but then he'll also use a very verbose, backhanded way to tell you sit down and shut up. But he'll be like, perhaps you need a medicament. I've seen you comport yourself better picking your child up from school. He's just it's so British and beautiful. Anyway.
When will you wear wigs?
So the Senate Parliamentarian is responsible for determining if any given provision within a budget resolution is extraneous or otherwise incidental and thus would warrant removal from the bill. On incidental matters, so whenever that comes up, the Senate Parliamentarian will hear both sides argue their case in what they call a bird bath. Ain't that cute? Tweet, yep. So, I don't know. Our Senate rules are cutesy. So, the Senate Parliamentarian's ruling is honored as a norm, not a rule. The Senate is a legislative body largely governed by norms until relatively recently. So, you're supposed to listen to the parliamentarian, and most of the times you do, but you can fire him. In 2001, Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott fired his Senate Parliamentarian, reportedly over friction about whether or not they could use the process more than once in a year. And some activist lawmakers have noted that the vice president presides over the Senate and thus has the ability to overrule the parliamentarian's decision. This hasn't happened since 1975, though. Vice President Nelson Rockefeller shoved through changes to the filibuster rules against the advice of the Senate parliamentarian at the time. But it is possible, just not common.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions about the role that the Senate parliamentarian
Do
plays?
they have the same power as people on the CBO? Do they work? Are they like against each other? Because you said it was a bird bath. So is it like, are they wrestling or?
So the Senate parliamentarian is not part of the Congressional Budget Office.
Yeah, they're two separate entities.
And they don't work against each other.
They're on the same side.
There are two steps that you have to go through, like two check marks you have to get.
Okay. So leveling.
The two people the two sides that argue would typically be partisan. So it's like, I think this provision is fine. I think this provision is incidental and thus cannot be passed through budget reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
Rabble, 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 bird bath.
Okay, I get it.
So it's just like a debate amongst legislators themselves.
So to tie everything to today and like the act.
Biden?
Yeah, Biden's.
That's a perfect transition.
Mm-hmm.
So the American Rescue Plan, $1.8 trillion. This is what he comes into the White House with, right?
Yeah.
There are three components broadly. It's $400 billion allocated to COVID-related necessities, including testing and distribution of vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
$1 trillion for direct relief to American families.
Yeah.
And $400 billion for aid to communities and businesses. There's a lot more included in the bill. I won't break it down piece by piece because it is long as hell.
And we talked about it.
We did. And the Biden administration, we talked more about his executive action.
I remember talking about what was in this America Act Now thing. I keep forgetting what it's called.
The American Rescue Plan.
Yeah, we talked about what was in the American Rescue Plan. I remember because it was also with student loan stuff being frozen.
Indeed. So the Biden administration has been the first to admit that the bill that passes will not resemble the bill which he has proposed exactly, or perhaps, at all.
That's government.
That is government. It is quite wise on the part of Joe Biden, who is a creature of the Senate, to know this is not going to make it through the Senate without negotiation.
Yeah, that's why you have to ask for more than you want.
Exactly. So what's interesting is part of some of the provisions, which I'll mention, are like a $15 minimum wage,
mm-hmm.
statehood for Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. I am not a Senate parliamentarian expert, but I find it hard to believe that those will clear that process. I don't see how they're directly related to federal revenue or how their impact on spending is not incidental.
Would a $15 minimum wage ever be something we voted upon? Because I know sometimes there's things that we vote on the ballot during voting seasons, like legalize marijuana, and after voting day you find out like, oh, Massachusetts has legal marijuana now. Would that ever happen state by state in a voting booth where it's like you vote?
It could,
minimum
there
wage?
Is so like ballot measures like that have a rather rigorous process they have to go through to get onto the ballot, and
mm-hmm.
it varies state by state, but that is a wonderful way to go about changing policy. It's difficult, but it is ideal.
Because then you get what the people actually want.
Right. I mean, you have these individual expressions of popular will in each state. And you also, a lot of times states are referred to as like labs of democracy. So they'll try out policy and they'll see if it works. And if it does, then maybe it'll work on a federal level, or maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
And, Obamacare started out as a plan that was instituted by Governor Mitt Romney in Massachusetts. And then he ran against it.
Oh.
Cute. But, I mean, whatever.
Whatever, Rit Momney.
So, I love Rit Momney. Stream Rit Momney on your music platforms. So, in the event that these provisions are struck from the bill by the Senate Parliamentarian, it's unclear what Democrats are going to do. They could try to overrule the parliamentarian. That goes against the norms of the Senate. They could attempt to pass it like a normal bill. You're bound to hit a filibuster. They can try to do away with the filibuster, which is a whole other legislative undertaking.
There's just so many doors. There's so many doors.
Behind every door is a rabbit hole, and at the bottom of the rabbit hole is 6 more doors. Yes,
yeah.
It never ends. But this is the thing about learning about government. It is huge.
It's huge.
I will never understand all of the ways that it works. I barely understand it now, and I think I have a relatively robust understanding. Still, so much eludes me. So much doesn't make sense. But the way that I've gone about, and the way I think people go about building understandings, is like, you learn about one thing. In this case, I've talked to you rather at length about budget reconciliation, and now you know that.
Yeah.
Honestly, this particular topic is only going to come into play once a year, but next year,
I'll know what's up.
Or you can replay the episode, whichever works for you.
And also, I learned other small things like deficit versus debt. Had no idea.
Yes, a very important distinction.
I think every episode, not only am I learning about government as a whole, but like the dissection of it all and how complicated things can be. Versus like as an outsider, I could be like, why has nothing ever happened?
It seems so simple, right? It's like, why can't we agree? And it's like, well, you got to jump through like 50 hoops before.
Actually 50 hoops.
Yeah, it's complicated.
And then after those 50 hoops, they're like, all right, well, now we're doing monkey bars. How long can you hold on for?
This, again, it is by design. The idea, a central idea to like our government as it's designed is that policy and like giant revolutionary change doesn't happen all the time. That would typically result in political instability. And so instead you have this incremental, slower process that cools the passions of the people, which is the thing that people say, and thus can govern more rationally when it is able to govern it all. And that brings us to where the Biden administration ultimately finds themselves. They're pursuing a parallel track. They're all about unity, but they're really concerned with getting help to American families now.
Which is so important. So I'm glad that's something that they're focusing on.
Absolutely. It is a good idea to start with this. Obviously, it is essential legislation, and when you enter office, you have the most political capital to expend. So we have currently the road paved for budget reconciliation, which would allow Democrats to pass this bill on a strictly party line vote, with Kamala Harris ostensibly breaking the tie in the Senate as the presiding officer.
So through budget reconciliation, you only need 51, but during other things, you need 56 or 64?
No. 60.
60.
If a bill is filibustered, you need 60 votes to close the filibuster in what they call a cloture vote. So the Biden administration has made clear its intention to pursue bipartisanship as much as it can, but they also are very clear that they have learned the lessons of the early Obama administration, where they waited for bipartisan, cooperation. They negotiated, and then ultimately they were met with no support in the end from the other side of the aisle. So Biden has left open the door for negotiations, but also has signaled, if you guys don't want to negotiate, we're moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd like you to have input on this piece of legislation. But if you aren't going to do that in a timely manner, you're going to move forward. And I believe the date that he's outlined is March 15th. He would like to have it passed and on his desk for signing, because that has to do with the expiration of certain other moratoriums, I believe on rent and evictions primarily.
So we'll see what happens in a month, I guess.
We will indeed. Keep an eye out, everyone. When news be talking about budget reconciliation, you already know what they're talking about.
You know the vibes.
You have gotten the 411. And I hope you enjoyed our super, super bubbly episode of The Liberal Bubble.
Pop, pop, pop. I learned a bunch. I'm actually surprised because I thought by today I would have forgotten everything I learned the past 2 episodes, but it's in my brain.
I'm so glad to hear that.
And I hope rent free.
It is, at least until they it expires on March 15th.
Yeah.
Unless they pass this bill. But thank you for joining us on The Liberal Bubble. Join us next Tuesday for another episode. I hope we have made budget reconciliation sufficiently steamy for you.
I hope we did. And you could find
the
podcast on Spotify, on the podcasting app, and YouTube, aka YouTube.
Indeed.
You could find.
And you can follow me on Twitter, Skydoge Bubble, Instagram, Facebook, Skydoge Bubble. Lady Gleep, where can our fans
Lady
find
Gleep
you?
On YouTube and Instagram. Bye, guys.
Bark Bjork, hello. Thanks for sticking around post-episode. I hope you had a wonderfully sexy time learning about budget reconciliation. In the episode, we talked about the very narrow use of budget reconciliation and the limited invocation of the process. I also noted that the prospect of a $15 minimum wage clearing the Senate Parliamentarian was low. This is because of the Byrd rule. The decision of the Senate Parliamentarian to not allow a $15 minimum wage to be part of a budget reconciliation bill in the Senate is not a reflection of the Senate Parliamentarian's personal political views on the matter. It is the job of the Senate Parliamentarian to enforce the rules of the Senate. The people who write the rules of the Senate, or otherwise have the power to change the rules of the Senate, are the senators. I have observed a fair bit of consternation around the idea that an unelected bureaucrat, the Senate Parliamentarian, would get to decide what goes in the bill and what doesn't. And I understand that frustration. It seems very wrong. You could make the case that the Democrats should have overruled the parliamentarian, that Kamala Harris should have overruled the Senate Parliamentarian. The administration opted not to do that. The Senate debated whether or not to include a $15 minimum wage in the bill, regardless of the Senate Parliamentarian's ruling. It was voted down, with multiple Democratic senators voting against the inclusion of a $15 minimum wage. This evoked the ire of progressive policymakers and Twitter users alike. Understandably, a $15 minimum wage is a central promise of the Democratic Party, and it is also incredibly important so that people have a wage that they can survive off of. The prospect that anyone would have to work a full-time job and still fall below the poverty line is frankly absurd. And so that anger and frustration with Democrats' inability to get this particular minimum wage raise passed is understandable. But I hope that this episode has provided something by way of an explanation as to why. I am of the belief that the $15 minimum wage was a provision that should not and could not be included in budget reconciliation legislation, and that it should go through normal order. The main attraction of budget reconciliation as a process is that it avoids the possibility of a Senate filibuster. And we all know that if a bill were to go through normal process, it would be filibustered in the Senate. A $15 minimum wage would be filibustered in the Senate. In this way, I firmly believe I am 100% invested in the idea that we are having a proxy fight about the filibuster and we're not talking about the filibuster. Passing bills through normal Senate order, I think, is the optimal way to create policy. But it's very clear that as long as the filibuster remains a part of that normal order process, nothing's going to get done. And Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin's refusal to include a $15 minimum wage in a budget reconciliation bill and insistence that it go through normal order are hard to square with their position that the filibuster should remain. Both senators believe that the filibuster should not be abolished. Why, I ask, is the preservation of a Senate rule which was created by accident and which is designed to protect the rights of the electoral minority and prevent the passage of legislation on a simple majority, is good for the country, especially given the fact that it has ground the ability of the upper chamber of our Congress to govern to a screeching halt for years. So, if it is their belief that a $15 minimum wage needs to go through normal order, and they understand that the filibuster poses a problem therein, I would like to know how the fuck they square those opinions. If you want to pass a $15 minimum wage, if you want to pass any progressive policy, you are ultimately going to have to contend with the filibuster. And I'm convinced the only way you get anything done is by getting rid of the filibuster. There is a risk here. And we'll have a full episode on this. But the risk in abolishing the filibuster is that when the other party is in the majority, they can pass bills with a simple 51 votes. And therefore, you can have policy being passed and repealed on simple majority votes. This leads to policy whiplash, right? So a Democratic Congress comes in, passes a bunch of laws. Then a Republican Congress regains the majority, repeals those laws. This is problematic. It's not ideal, but I also firmly believe that we are already subject to policy whiplash. If you listened to the episode on executive orders, our second episode, I explained that executive orders are a tool that the president uses when Congress cannot effectively legislate. And they can be signed and unsigned by successive presidents. So, we saw on the first day of the Biden administration policy whiplash. A lot of what Trump signed via executive order was unsigned with a stroke of a pen. So I would like to see the majority in the Senate push to abolish the filibuster so that they can actually get onto the business of legislating. And if they're not going to do that, I would like to see an open discussion as to why not. I need to hear from Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin why the preservation of this rule is more important than paying Americans a living wage. I do share their concerns about passing this provision through budget reconciliation because budget reconciliation has a defined narrow focus. And if you start to expand that focus to allow, quote, non-germane or incidental things to pass through the process, you're essentially allowing policy to be made by circumventing the filibuster. That's the only thing that really differentiates budget reconciliation from normal order. The limits on what it can do in terms of scope, and the fact it won't be filibustered. So, once again, we're fighting about the filibuster. And I don't think the media has done a good job recognizing that that is the dynamic at play. I don't think elected representatives have done a good enough job explaining why they did what they did. Ultimately, I think the prospect of distorting budget reconciliation into a filibuster circumvention mechanism is just a poor way of addressing the problem that is the filibuster. With that said, the $15 minimum wage is not dead. It just didn't pass this time, and I know that that will have a painful impact on workers who need to see a raise in their wages. But I think it would be a mistake to write off the Democratic Party entirely. I think it would be a mistake to say that they have abandoned their promises entirely. But when it comes to the implementation and creation of policy which is good for people, like the $15 minimum wage is, and which is broadly popular across party lines, which the $15 minimum wage is, you owe the people an explanation as to why you are not supporting it, especially if you're going to vote it down in such spectacularly callous fashion as Kyrsten Sinema did. Kyrsten Sinema voted down the provision in the same way that John McCain did when he voted down the Trump administration's attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act through their first budget reconciliation process. What John McCain did was heroic. It protected 20 million Americans from being thrown off health insurance. What Kyrsten Sinema did is uphold the integrity of the budget reconciliation process, and those two things are not comparable in terms of righteousness. It's not a good look to just thumbs down the idea of paying people $15 an hour. It's not a good look. So if you're a person that is upset that a $15 minimum wage increase was not included as part of this COVID relief bill, I understand. As people who voted for Democrats, as a liberal, it is perfectly reasonable to get angry with your elected representatives, even if they're representatives that you worked to elect. They work for you, so let them hear your voice on this issue. But don't give up on the process of government entirely because they failed to deliver on their promise. They failed, period. But it doesn't mean that they're done trying. And they'll keep trying if you keep putting pressure on them. So now comes the part where I tell you to call your senators. If anyone out there is from West Virginia or Arizona, you can call Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema respectively, and you can leave them a message, or you can tell their office exactly how you feel. Do it politely, but do it firmly. If you've never called Congress before, it seems like it might be a scary thing to do. I promise you it's not. I've done it before. You can either go on to your senator's website and find the number to their office specifically, or you can call the switchboard at the United States Capitol. And the number to do that is 202-224-3121. A switchboard operator will answer, and you tell them what state you're from, who you're trying to reach, your senators. They will connect you to that office. More than anything, I hope that this episode has provided an explanation as to why the Democratic Party seemed to fail on delivering this key campaign promise, and hopefully rekindle some hope that the government can still function, that possibility of a $15 minimum wage is not dead. It's something that we need to continue to fight for. So I hope, despite this incredibly disappointing development, that you lean in instead of pulling back, and that you tune in next week for our episode of The Liberal Bubble. We'll be discussing impeachment in a 2-part episode, and then we are going to discuss the Senate filibuster. With that said, this is Skydoge wrapping up a lengthy editorial postscript to this episode. And with that, goodbye.